So Matt Brown, Extra Points at Matt Brown EP on Twitter. You covered the national championship game. I was following the saga the entire way. You were unsure whether or not you would get credentialed. The NCAA or the college football playoff initially said, nah, you don't write enough about the actual sport of college football, as though the sport is the reason why we have the national championship tournament. It's all about business and money, and that's what you cover. But I'm glad you got in. How was it?
I'm glad I got in, too. It was unlike any other event I think I've covered in my career. The scope and the spectacle on a championship game is outstrips that of any of the major bowls or conference championship games that I've been to. Despite the fact that it was north of $2,000 to get in, not any of the initial top seeds in this game. The atmosphere and the energy was outstanding. Especially because Notre Dame had such a spirited comeback late in the game. It seemed like maybe we'd all kind of change the channel or let our minds wander in the mid-third quarter, but we had a great championship game.
We could argue that maybe Ohio State did too, and that is maybe that's a lesson for not only Ryan Day but all other college football coaches that in championship-type games don't ever let up. And I'm not saying that they did. I have no idea how it all of a sudden became a game, but it was a one-sided game for a long time. I thought once Notre Dame put that 18-play, 9:45 drive on display, they were pretty much spent certainly for the next five or six drives. They did basically nothing. But what made it? But what made it such a spectacle in terms of coverage? Because I've covered a lot of Final Fours, and those are spectacles. And maybe you get jaded after a bit, but you've covered big events. So what made this one different?
I think part of it is, candidly, are the teams involved, right? Ohio State and Notre Dame are potentially the two largest and most national fan bases in the country. Both of them also are coming in with, I think, a little bit of a complex. Right before this season, Notre Dame hadn't won a major bowl game almost since before I was born, it feels like. It became a perennial tradition for them, and they still haven't beaten Ohio State since, before the Ottoman Empire. And then Ohio State. And I, as somebody close to the program, count myself as one of these people. We're ready to fire Ryan Day 4 weeks ago. I can't recall a situation here where you have a guy with a 92% winning percentage that went from having to have security at his house and his kids being yelled at in the grocery store to now being elevated in the pantheon of greats in one of the most historic programs. So you have 75,000 people that are all 2 bad plays away from needing to check into therapy. Plus an enormous stadium. There's concerts. You have the weird weather that's kind of putting everybody at edge. Everything with the presentation was turned up to 11, which may not be quite what both these fan bases were used to. But I will say, in the building, it really did feel electric. And that's kind of the risk you take with sometimes. And I think the Final Four suffers from this a lot. When you just park so many people into a barn and it feels like it's more about brand activation than it is actual elite championship competition. I did not get that feeling from this game last night.
Yeah, well, the truth is in a Final Four setting, when the court is so far away from the actual fans, it's actually hard to have a good atmosphere for those games. But in football, which it's commonplace at this point, that they're all playing. I mean, they played in the home of the Atlanta Falcons last night, so they're used to having big football games there. Although I would argue, I'm not sure the Atlanta Falcons play a ton of big football games. Matt Brown, Extra Points, is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. But you've had a long run. You started this whole trip in Nashville, right? At the NCAA convention, but I know you also met with players who were discussing potentially organizing. What was your impression? What was your takeaway from those meetings?
Yeah, the athletes.org hosted probably the largest athlete labor event, athlete organizing event that's ever happened. There are 50 FBS football players from major P4 and major G5 programs all throughout the country. And my takeaway here is that I wouldn't look at this event as, oh, this is definitely the microcosm of a union, or this wasn't successful because it's not a union. You and I, we can go call up Jim Phillips. We can go call up athletic directors. We can call up the same 6 Twitter lawyers, and we can get an opinion about what people think about the transfer portal, what people think about the changes in college athletics. But largely, college athletes are not plugged into those situations the same way. It's difficult to talk to them. And what I think was valuable about this wasn't just for me to put a microphone in front of somebody and say, hey, as the actual football player, what do you think about playing a 16-game schedule? What do you think about a transfer window portal that's only 10 days? But also so they can talk to each other. Because many of them said, we don't really know what our peers think. During the season, we're locked in. We're not necessarily talking with our old 7-on-7 guys at the South Florida Express. We're not necessarily talking shop with people at other conferences. This was a chance to be able to get those different perspectives. And I can't begin to tell you how the athlete labor movement is going to end or what's going to happen with employment. The one thing that I do believe as a reporter and as a person is that if there's going to be major decisions made about athletes should be in the room. Athletes should have a voice, and we're beginning to see the catalyst of that movement happening here.
I certainly hope so. I'll just relate a quick story. I'm trying to think how many years this goes back. I can just tell you that E.J. Manuel was still a quarterback at Florida State at the time, so I don't remember the actual year. But we were doing the ACC Summer Media Day it was at Pinehurst in North Carolina, and that was it was at the beginning of why can't these athletes get some money legally for their efforts? And I swear to you, every single athlete I asked that question, they were like, we don't care. So, the funny thing is that I think it takes the athletes a little bit longer. They're so insulated from all of these things. It just takes it a little bit longer for that to kind of filter down through. And we're long past the days where the athlete should be receiving something other than just the scholarship, which I've always argued varies in value depending on the athlete and the university that they're playing at. So I'm glad we're here. I don't know if we're ever going to get to a point where the athletes are in control and have any say, because you have said on this program many times that you think that the atmosphere is ripe for Congress to get in and essentially set the rules, which would really eliminate the athletes from the equation, no?
Potentially, right? A lot of this depends on just the legal situation, who you're collective bargaining with, who's the designated agent, what the law says about any of these things. It's hard to project. I think the last thing before I go here to catch this flight, to reiterate, I think, to the audience, is that these conversations are really about much more than just money. Everyone at the P5 level is getting paid, right? This is the first time in my career when I've been interviewing college athletes who mostly are making more money than I am.
Right.
And I say that not pejoratively, like that's just the reality. But they don't have a say in practice conditions or about what majors they can actually take. And the difference between what's permitted by a coach in college versus the pros is massive. And that's because one has an NFLPA and one has a couple of guys on Twitter. And some agents that sometimes are real agents and sometimes are schmucks like you and me or people from the dorm, and that's what these movements are about. So I have some coverage on that on our newsletter, extrapointsmb.com. We're going to have I think a little bit more about this championship game as I'm trying to unpack everything from the last 7 days on the road. I appreciate you having me on, and I'll catch up with you hopefully if I ever get back to Chicago.
All right, man. Thank you very much, man. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, brother.